You could feel the tension in the room long before a single word was spoken. It was that thick kind of silence, like the stillness before a thunderstorm. A long, slow pause where everyone knows something big is about to happen, but no one knows exactly what. The congressional hearing room was full. Reporters lined the back rows, staffers whispered from the wings, and every camera light was on. C-SPAN was live, and every seat in the Oversight Committee was taken. At the far end of the panel sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, calm, still, focused. She didn't shift in her seat. She didn't fidget with her notes. Her hands rested on the table, folded gently as she waited. Across from her sat Kash Patel. He looked like a man who'd been here before because he had. Clean suit, red tie, confident smirk. A former defense official, once chief of staff to the acting secretary of defense, and a regular on cable news. He wasn't just used to the spotlight, he thrived in it. Patel had a plan that day, you could tell. He came to speak over the noise, to talk past his questioners, and remind the room who he was and what he had done. He didn't fear the committee. He didn't fear the cameras. And most of all, he didn't fear Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. But he should have. Because what Kash Patel didn't understand, what so many underestimated, was that this wasn't going to be a political back and forth or a soundbite battle. This was going to be a cross-examination, and Crockett wasn't there to play. The session opened as many do. The chairman outlined the purpose of the hearing, to investigate the handling or mishandling of classified documents by former officials, and to examine whether public statements matched private testimony, routine business on paper. But nobody in that room believed this would be routine. Patel answered the first few questions smoothly. He'd done this before, confident, poised, controlling the tempo. When friendly members from his side of the aisle tossed him softballs, he launched into long, rehearsed responses about his distinguished service. "I've spent my career protecting this country," he said more than once. "My record speaks for itself," and the phrase he used like a shield. "With all due respect, you don't understand how national security works." He was warm when he needed to be, dismissive when it served him. He'd been briefed, coached, and practiced. But what no one had truly prepared him for was Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. When it was her turn to speak, Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't posture. She didn't open with a speech. Instead, she leaned slightly forward, adjusted her microphone, and said, "Mr. Patel, thank you for being here today." Polite, neutral, unthreatening, but her tone was deliberate, grounded. The kind of tone you'd hear in a courtroom, not a committee. It wasn't the start of a debate. It was the beginning of a strategy. She continued, "Back in September on Fox News, you stated that the documents in question were properly declassified and returned through official channels. Is that correct?" "Yes," Patel replied quickly. "That's accurate. I was directly involved in the process. Everything was done by the book." Crockett nodded slowly. "And yet, under oath last year, you testified that you had no direct knowledge of any formal declassification process being followed." She picked up a printed document from her folder. "These are your words, Mr. Patel." The room shifted slightly. Some reporters looked up from their phones. Patel leaned forward. "Context matters, Congresswoman." "Of course," she replied evenly. "So let's talk context." She placed the paper down on the table carefully, then looked up. "You made a public claim that you were directly involved, but in sworn testimony, you said you had no knowledge. That's not about context. That's a contradiction." Patel started to respond, but Crockett continued. "Did you or did you not sign a certification on June 3rd stating that all classified materials had been returned?" "Yes, I signed the certification." "And were all materials, in fact, returned at that time?" "To the best of my knowledge." "Yes or no, Mr. Patel?" A pause. "No," he said quietly. Some materials were later discovered. More shifting in seats. Someone cleared their throat. One of the Democratic staffers made a note. "Thank you," Crockett said. "So you signed a document stating something was complete when it wasn't. Did you verify the information before signing?" "That's not how the process works," Patel replied quickly. "There are layers of oversight. Many people are involved." "But your name was on the certification." "Yes." "So did you verify the information?" "I relied on the teams." "Mr. Patel," Crockett said, still calm, still focused. "Did you verify the information?" Patel exhaled sharply. "No." The room got very quiet. Crockett didn't press. She didn't gloat. She moved on. "Let me ask you this. During your time in the Department of Defense, were you trained on the proper handling of classified materials?" "Yes." "Did that training include guidance on storage locations?" "Yes." "And were you taught that storing classified documents in places like a bathroom, a ballroom, or a private guest room was acceptable?" Patel looked up. "No," he admitted. "You were not taught that," Crockett repeated, her voice level. "No." She gave a small nod, as if confirming a mental checklist. Then she paused, let the silence hang. Reporters had their pens up now. Phones were recording. Even the committee members on the other side were listening more closely. Patel could feel the shift. He sat straighter, tried to regain his footing. "Congresswoman, these are highly politicized accusations," he said, voice rising just slightly. "You're cherry-picking statements, taking things out of context. You haven't worked in national security. You don't know what it requires." He leaned forward a bit, his tone sharpening. "I've briefed presidents. I've managed operations. I've made the tough calls. So forgive me if I don't believe a freshman congresswoman understands what's truly at stake." There it was. The move he'd used before. The belittling line. The implication that experience beats preparation. That tenure trumps truth. But what Kash Patel didn't realize was that Jasmine Crockett had been waiting for him to go there. She looked at him directly, calm, still. "Mr. Patel," she said softly, "before I was elected to Congress, I spent 15 years as a trial attorney." Her voice didn't rise. "I've cross-examined hundreds of witnesses who thought they could bluff their way through." She leaned in just slightly. "And I have learned something very simple." Then, after the briefest pause, she delivered the sentence that would replay on cable news, dominate social media, and leave the hearing room in stunned silence. "People telling the truth don't usually need to attack the person asking the questions." No one spoke. No one moved. It was like the air had been sucked from the room. Across the panel, someone raised an eyebrow. On the Republican side, a staffer looked away. A reporter in the back muttered, "Wow," just loud enough for his mic to catch it. Kash Patel didn't speak. He didn't smirk. He didn't lean forward again. He sat back, quiet, exposed. The hearing wasn't over, but the dynamic had shifted, because from that point on, every answer would feel defensive. Every denial would sound hollow, and no amount of credentials could unsay what had just been said. Kash Patel had been here before, testifying, maneuvering, navigating pressure. But something about this moment was different. The rhythm wasn't his. The energy in the room had shifted. He wasn't setting the tempo anymore. Jasmine Crockett was. She didn't need to raise her voice or gesture wildly. She used silence like a scalpel. Her questions didn't just probe, they exposed. And Kash Patel, for the first time in a long time, looked like a man who realized he was no longer in control. Still, he wasn't going to make it easy. When she asked if he had personally verified the documents before signing the certification, he tried to pivot. "As I've said, Congresswoman," he began, "these processes involve teams. We don't operate in a vacuum. The understanding at that time. Crockett didn't move. She simply interrupted, gently but firmly. I'm not asking about the team, Mr. Patel. I'm asking about your signature. He blinked. She continued. When you sign a statement certifying that all classified documents have been returned, either you know that to be true or you don't. He leaned forward slightly. There are chain of custody procedures that extend beyond my desk. I relied on trusted colleagues. And yet, Crockett said, you were the one who signed it. The sentence hung in the air like smoke. A moment passed. Patel tried to reassert himself. I believe the information I had was accurate at the time. Belief, Crockett replied, is not verification. Again, she didn't raise her voice, but the words landed like weight on stone. From his posture, you could tell Patel was recalculating. He knew how to push back against political opponents, interrupt, reframe, accuse. But Crockett wasn't debating policy. She was dissecting inconsistencies and doing it like a trial attorney, not a politician. He shifted tactics. You're reading selectively, Congresswoman. I've provided full context in other statements, interviews, and my book. She raised an eyebrow. Your book is not a sworn deposition, Mr. Patel. A few staffers tried to suppress smiles. Reporters looked up. Cameras caught every twitch. Patel pressed on. I've made myself available repeatedly, but these hearings often descend into political theater. Let's not pretend this is about national security. Crockett didn't flinch. It is absolutely about national security, and it's also about the truth. Two things that should never be in conflict. Patel looked frustrated now. I understand this is your moment, he said, almost smirking, and I respect your passion, but experience matters. I've served in intelligence. I've advised presidents. I know the difference between real threats and political games. The room shifted. Crockett didn't look insulted. She looked ready. I've heard that before, she said quietly. She opened another folder and pulled out a transcript. In your interview on May 21st, you said, quote, all documents were declassified through proper channels. She flipped the page. In your deposition from June 14th, you said, quote, I do not recall any formal declassification procedures. She placed the papers side by side. These aren't comments taken years apart. They're 3 weeks apart. Patel exhaled, tried to recover. I was referring to different sets of documents. No, Crockett said calmly. You were referring to the same set. Another pause. I've clarified that statement elsewhere. Crockett leaned in slightly, not with aggression, but with control. Would you like to clarify it now, under oath? For the first time, Patel didn't answer immediately. A slight rustle moved through the gallery. Journalists started typing faster. One of them whispered, she's pulling the thread. And she was. Gently, deliberately, she was unraveling the narrative. Then came the question that stopped the room cold. Mr. Patel, she asked, were you ever instructed, or did you instruct others, not to disclose the location of remaining classified documents to federal investigators? His eyes narrowed. I'm not going to discuss internal communications. You've already discussed them publicly. That was a broad policy commentary. Crockett tilted her head. Were you involved in any discussion, formal or informal, about withholding information from federal authorities? I refuse to answer on the grounds of confidentiality. Crockett waited a beat. Not legality, confidentiality. Patel didn't respond. She nodded once, not to him, but to herself. Another box checked, another line drawn. At that point, Patel changed his tone. His frustration turned into something sharper. Congresswoman, with all due respect, you're out of your depth. National security isn't a courtroom. It's not about clever phrasing. It's about hard choices made in real time, under pressure. Crockett let the silence return. Let the words hang, settle, turn stale. Then she spoke. You're right. It's not a courtroom. But the truth doesn't change based on the room we're in. Another silence. You've claimed authority based on your service, she continued. That's fair, but authority without accountability is dangerous. He opened his mouth to speak, but she raised her hand gently, not to silence him, but to finish her point. And let me be clear, she said, your experience is not the issue here. Your answers are. That's when something broke in the room, not loudly, not suddenly, but unmistakably. You could feel it, the shift. Crockett had moved past challenging Patel's statements. She was now questioning his credibility, not through accusation, but through pattern. Not with anger, but with precision. And Patel knew it. He leaned back slightly, spoke slower, measured, as if choosing his words a little more carefully. The bravado had dimmed. The smirk was gone. For the remainder of her time, Crockett asked two final questions. Were you ever informed, verbally or in writing, that classified documents were improperly stored? I don't recall receiving such information. And did you ever raise concerns about the storage locations? No. She paused. Then, thank you. And that was it. No gavel, no outburst, no dramatic walk-off. Just quiet. And in that quiet, something clear. Jasmine Crockett wasn't there to win a headline. She was there to expose a pattern, and she had done exactly that. After Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett questioned Kash Patel's conflicting statements and made him admit that he hadn't verified the documents he signed off on, the hearing room grew tense. But the session wasn't over. Patel adjusted his tie. His answers were becoming shorter, more guarded. His once relaxed demeanor had turned stiff, and everyone in the room could feel it. Crockett had done something that not many had managed before. She had disrupted his rhythm, and she hadn't even raised her voice. Now, other members were taking their turns, but Patel's eyes kept drifting back toward Crockett. He knew she wasn't finished, and he was right. When Crockett spoke again during her follow-up round, she went straight back to her points. Mr. Patel, she began, you've emphasized your experience in national security and government operations, and I'm not here to dispute your resume, but I do want to understand how that experience aligns with your public statements and sworn testimony. He nodded, trying to stay composed. She continued, can you explain why, on May 12th, you said publicly that the documents were kept in locations protected by the Secret Service, and then later admitted that document security wasn't their responsibility? Patel sighed. Because the locations were under Secret Service protection, I was making a general point. But that general point, she said, was misleading, wasn't it? I don't think so. Even though you later admitted that document handling falls under entirely different protocols, Patel hesitated. Again, that's a matter of interpretation. Crockett didn't argue. She just nodded. Let's talk about responsibility then. She opened a folder. You were involved in the transition period following the 2020 election, correct? Yes. And during that time, you attended internal discussions about deployment of federal resources, correct? I attended discussions, but I'm not going to comment on confidential deliberations. You already commented on them publicly in interviews and your book. He didn't answer. So for the record, Crockett said, you refuse to discuss in this setting what you've already shared in public forums. Patel exhaled. Those comments were made in general terms. She stopped and looked directly at him. Do you believe that general public statements should be held to a lower standard than sworn testimony? He blinked. I'm not sure I understand the question. I think you do, she said calmly. because that's the heart of the issue today." The room was silent again. Patel glanced to the side of the panel where friendly faces usually were, but this time, no one spoke up. No one came to his defense. Crockett pressed on. "You've questioned my experience. You've suggested I don't understand national security. That's fine. I'm used to being underestimated. But I do understand how truth works. And I do understand how contradictions, intentional or not, can erode public trust." Patel shifted. He picked up his water glass. His hand was steady, but his silence spoke louder than his words. "You said earlier that you didn't recall specific procedures for declassifying documents," she continued. "Yet you also said you were directly involved in that process. Can both be true?" He looked at her. "It depends on how you define involvement." "In this context," she said, "it means verifying the steps were taken properly. Did you do that?" "No," he admitted. "And yet you still signed off?" "Yes." Another pause. Crockett gave it space. She didn't need to rush. Then she asked, "Would you agree that signing off on something without verifying it could create the appearance of misconduct?" Patel nodded slightly. "Yes, it could appear that way." "Do you believe your actions reflect best practices for someone in your former position?" "I did what I believed was appropriate at the time." "That's not what I asked." Patel hesitated again. "No," he said. "That was the turning point." Now Crockett moved to close her questioning. "Mr. Patel," she said, "in your public remarks, you've repeatedly claimed that the scrutiny you face is political. But what I've done here is ask you about your own words, your own actions, your own signed documents." He didn't respond. She looked around the room briefly, then back at him. "This isn't about partisanship. It's about accountability." Then she added, almost as a side note, but with unmistakable clarity, "You've had every chance to clarify. But when facts don't support your version of events, you shift the frame. That's not defense. That's deflection." The chairman reminded her her time was almost up. She nodded and ended with one final sentence. "And no amount of classified briefings or titles will ever matter more than the truth someone tries to hide." She closed her folder. The room was quiet again. Kash Patel sat quietly for a moment after Jasmine Crockett finished her questioning. He didn't respond to her last point. He didn't need to. The damage was already done. But the hearing wasn't over, and Patel wasn't going to stay quiet for long. When the next committee member yielded back their time, Patel leaned into his microphone. "I want to clarify a few things," he said, his voice steady again, "because I believe some of what's being said here is misleading." He didn't mention Crockett by name, but the room understood who he was talking about. Patel straightened his posture. "Yes, I signed that certification. Yes, I said certain things publicly that don't match word for word with my testimony. But this entire process has been turned into a media spectacle. I came here to speak honestly. I came here to help. But I won't allow my reputation to be dragged through the mud based on misinterpretations." Some of the Republican members nodded slightly, but others looked down, silent. Crockett didn't respond. She didn't need to. Patel kept going. "Let's remember," he said, "I've worked in the National Security Council. I've worked with intelligence agencies. I've seen what real threats look like. And let me tell you, those threats don't come from paperwork or process errors. They come from enemies who want to see us divided." He looked directly at the cameras. "This hearing is political. That's the truth." Crockett didn't interrupt, but her expression didn't change. She wasn't rattled. She didn't even blink. The chairman asked if any other members had follow-up questions. Crockett raised her hand slightly. The room leaned in again. She adjusted her mic and spoke evenly. Mr. Patel, she said, you mentioned that this hearing is political, but everything I asked you today came from your own statements. Public interviews, sworn depositions, official documents with your signature. Patel nodded, and I stand by those statements in the appropriate context. That's the issue, Crockett said. Context can't be used as a shield against contradiction. He tried to interrupt. What I'm saying, but she continued, you're asking us to believe that each of these inconsistencies has an explanation. But when every answer is context or misinterpretation, it begins to look less like confusion and more like evasion. This time, Patel didn't have a comeback ready. She flipped to a new page in her notes. You say you came here to help, then help us understand this. In March of last year, you told a news outlet that you personally oversaw the relocation of certain sensitive materials to ensure their security. Is that correct? Patel shifted. That comment was referring to general oversight, not specific physical movement. She nodded. And in your deposition under oath, you said, quote, I was not involved in the handling or movement of any classified material. She held up both quotes, same page, side by side. These are your words, two versions of the same event. Patel started to explain. Again, the wording, she cut in gently, is precise. That's what makes this difficult to ignore. The room had gone still again. A staffer in the back passed a note to a committee member. A reporter typed rapidly. One aide whispered, He's unraveling. Crockett paused again. This isn't about one mistake. It's about a pattern. A public image carefully shaped, but inconsistent with sworn testimony. Patel leaned back. His voice was quieter now. I answered to the best of my ability. Maybe so, Crockett said, but the American people deserve better than maybe. At that point, Patel's demeanor changed. His confidence didn't return, but the edge in his tone did. I find it concerning, he said, that my integrity is being questioned by someone who's never worked in national security, someone who doesn't understand how fluid information can be in the moment. Crockett didn't react. Instead, she closed her folder, slowly, deliberately. Mr. Patel, she said, this isn't about who has more years in Washington. This is about whether the words you say in front of a camera match the ones you say under oath. He didn't speak. She went on. You've spent a lot of time today telling us what we don't understand, but what we do understand is contradiction. We understand accountability, and we understand when someone is avoiding the truth. The chairman tapped his gavel once to note the end of her time. Crockett nodded and leaned back in her seat. There was no mic drop moment, no shouting, just clarity, delivered without drama. But everyone in the room felt the shift. For the rest of the hearing, Patel spoke less. He repeated phrases like, I don't recall, and to the best of my knowledge. His earlier certainty had faded. And outside that hearing room, in newsrooms and offices across the country, people watched the replay, not for theatrics, but for the steady way a contradiction had been revealed, and how no amount of talking could unsay the facts. As the hearing stretched into its final hour, the mood in the room had noticeably shifted. Earlier in the day, Kash Patel had spoken with certainty, brushing off tough questions with ease. Now his responses were shorter, less confident. The once comfortable rhythm of testimony had turned into something more cautious, and Jasmine Crockett wasn't finished. The chairman acknowledged her for one final round of questioning. She didn't pause, she didn't adjust her notes, she simply began. Mr. Patel, earlier today you mentioned that experience matters. You're right, it does. That's why I'd like to ask you about one more experience. Specifically the certification you signed regarding document recovery. He nodded. You've testified today that you didn't personally verify that all classified documents had been returned, correct? Correct. You relied on others? Yes. Did you ask for written confirmation before signing? No. Did you receive verbal confirmation? I received general briefings. Did those briefings include a line-by-line inventory of classified material? No. She waited a moment, then asked, "So you signed a legal certification based on a general understanding, without specific proof?" Patel hesitated. That's how things are typically handled in those circumstances. Crockett shook her head slowly. That's not how legal certifications are handled, Mr. Patel. Not when they concern national security. There were no outbursts, no shouting, but the weight of her words settled heavily in the room. Crockett reached for a new document. This is an email exchange between you and another official, dated June 1st, 2 days before the certification was signed. In it, you ask whether there's a final inventory of the documents. She looked up. Do you recall sending that email? Patel leaned forward. I'd have to review the document to be sure. I can provide it, she said. A staffer handed him a copy. He glanced at it. Yes, I sent this. And the response you received said, quote, inventory is incomplete, awaiting confirmation from archives team. Yes. And 2 days later, you signed a certification stating that everything had been returned. Yes. Crockett let the moment breathe. Why? Patel responded carefully. Because I believed we had accounted for what mattered. But that's not what the certification says. It doesn't say what we believe matters was returned. It says everything was returned. That's a legal statement. Patel didn't answer. Reporters in the back began typing faster. You could feel the attention narrowing again, pulling toward the witness table. Crockett continued. This is no longer about memory lapses or generalizations. This is about knowingly signing something that wasn't true. Patel shook his head. I didn't knowingly misrepresent anything. But you were told the inventory was incomplete. I thought it was close enough. That's not the legal standard. She moved to another point. You've stated that classified materials were stored under conditions approved by the Secret Service. But testimony from a Secret Service representative submitted to this committee says, quote, we do not oversee document security. Our role is limited to physical protection of individuals. She raised her eyes. Would you like to revise your previous statement? Patel took a breath. I defer to their statement, which contradicts yours. He didn't respond. Crockett flipped to a closing page in her notes. There's a pattern here, she said. Statements made publicly that present one image. Testimony under oath that reveals something else. Legal documents signed without full knowledge. And repeated attempts to deflect by pointing to process or other people. Patel looked at the chairman, perhaps hoping for a signal that her time was up, but the chairman waited. Crockett wasn't finished. You've described these inconsistencies as mistakes, as misunderstandings. But when they stack up, one after another, they stop looking like mistakes. They start looking like strategy. Patel shifted again in his seat. Then she asked, Mr. Patel, have you at any point been advised by legal counsel to limit your answers today? He hesitated. Yes. Are you invoking attorney-client privilege? No. So you can answer my next question? He paused. I'll try. Were you ever told by anyone, formally or informally, that certain information should not be disclosed to this committee? Patel didn't answer immediately. Then finally, I was advised to be cautious in my wording. Crockett nodded. That says enough. She leaned back in her seat. And with that, the room understood. Crockett didn't need to accuse Patel of wrongdoing. She had laid out the timeline, the contradictions, the choices, and Patel's own words had done the rest. As the hearing moved into its final moments, the tone of the room was unmistakably different than when it began. Kash Patel had entered confident, sharp suit, sharper tongue. But now, his posture had shifted, shoulders lower, eyes more careful, words more measured. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett had barely raised her voice all day. She hadn't needed to. The evidence had done the work, so had Patel's own contradictions. Still, he tried once more. "I just want to say," he began, "that I've always done what I believed was in the best interest of this country. I have never acted with ill intent. I understand that mistakes happen, but they weren't malicious. This hearing to me has been less about truth and more about targeting individuals." There were a few murmurs in the room, some nods, but it was clear his argument had lost its power. The chairman looked to Congresswoman Crockett. "Final question," he said. "Make it brief." She didn't look at her notes. She didn't need to. She leaned forward, adjusted her mic, and looked Kash Patel directly in the eye. "Mr. Patel," she said calmly, "you've told us today that this hearing is political, that your intentions were pure, that your contradictions were just context." He nodded slightly, unsure what was coming. "But I didn't ask you about your politics. I didn't ask you about your feelings. I asked you about your facts." She paused. "And the facts don't care who you worked for." There it was, one sentence, quiet, steady, devastating. "The facts don't care who you worked for." The room froze. No interruptions, no gavel, no objections, just silence. Patel opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing left to say. Reporters looked at each other. Someone whispered, "That's it." The chairman gavelled the session closed. Crockett sat back. No smile, no victory lap, just quiet composure. Outside the hearing room, the impact began to ripple. Clips of the exchange spread online within minutes. News banners read, "Crockett closes with one line that shuts down Patel. Truth over power. House hearing ends in silence." "The facts don't care who you worked for" goes viral. Pundits called it one of the sharpest moments of congressional oversight in recent memory. Commentators on both sides agreed on one thing. Crockett had stayed calm. She had built her argument piece by piece, and in the end, with one sentence, she had made the point impossible to ignore. In law schools, the clip was used to teach how to end a cross-examination. In debate clubs, it was a lesson in restraint. On social media, it became a rallying cry for integrity in public service. Patel canceled interviews the next day. A spokesperson said he had no further comment. He didn't need one. The hearing had already said enough. As for Crockett, she returned to her district that weekend. At a town hall meeting, someone stood up and asked, "How did you stay so calm in that room?" She smiled. "When I practiced law," she said, "I learned that the louder someone yells, the less confident they usually are." The crowd laughed softly. "Truth doesn't need to yell," she continued. "It just needs to show up." The lesson lingered, not just in Washington, but in every space where power thinks it's untouchable, until the facts say otherwise. And just like that, the hearing ended, not with shouting or spectacle, but with one simple sentence that cut through all the noise. "The facts don't care who you worked for." It reminded us of something important, that titles don't protect you from accountability, and truth, when calmly and clearly spoken, still has the power to silence a room. Thanks for listening to this episode. If this story moved you, if it made you think, reflect, or remember your own moment of standing up to power, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We break down real moments like this every day, where power meets truth, and only one walks away unchanged. Leave a comment below. Tell us, when was the last time you spoke up, when it wasn't easy, but it was necessary? Until next time, stay sharp, stay informed, and remember, truth doesn't shout, it stands.